Hello and welcome back to another episode. So today is an exciting day, at least it is for me, because today marks the day that I actually start putting the Alfa Romeo back together. Oh. So yes, today is an exciting day, at least it is for me, because today is the day I start reassembly of my Alfa Romeo. It's been a long time coming. So you may have noticed a couple of episodes ago I had the unfortunate task of removing the gearbox. That was to do the clutch and the rear main seal, but that is now done. Thank you God, that is out of the way. Peace of mind for the future. What this now means is we can crack on with the car. So anyway, in this episode what I'm going to be doing is refitting the oil cooler together with some new copper washers to the banjo bolts. Once that's done, I'll be fitting the starter motor and the alternator. I've just received these back from being serviced and reconditioned, and these now have a full clean bill of health ready to go back on the car. Again, peace of mind for the future. Once that is on, or once those are on, I'll be refitting the exhaust manifolds. You may have noticed on my last episode I titanium heat wrapped those. I've got a couple of heat shields to go with those as well, and those will be going straight back onto the car. Once all that is out of the way, I'll be moving on to the best bit, and that is refitting my front subframe. So yes, this front subframe has been sat in my garage for a long time, all freshly powder coated, looking pretty, doing nothing, staring at me, and today's the day I'll be refitting it no matter what. So yes, before we begin, I've got a lot to get through, but I'd just like to say thank you as always to all of my subscribers. If you haven't already subscribed, then please do consider doing so. Please do share my videos far and wide, help me out as much as possible, and I'll keep these videos coming for as long as I can. So without further ado, that is more than enough waffle from me. Let's get stuck straight into it. Okay, so first things first, the first job is to fit the new copper washers onto the end of the banjo bolts to the oil cooler. I got these copper washers from Totally Alpha. Now I'm doing these first before I fit the starter motor, because this one on the left just here gets in the way of the back of the starter, stopping you from getting a socket onto the end. So yeah, it's a good time to do it now. And believe me when I say it's such a luxury being able to get at that banjo bolt properly with a socket compared to what it was like trying to get it off. On goes that small little electrical connector. And the oil cooler is now fitted. It's not a new one, it is the original oil cooler, but it wasn't leaking. I just gave it a bit of a refurb. Weatherproof it a little bit more, make it look a lot more pretty. The bracket underneath I had replated together with a lot of other hardware. And those banjo bolts are now installed and ready to go. Okay, so this is the starter motor and the alternator after I just removed it from the car prior to getting them serviced. And this is what they look like once I got them back. They've got a clean bill of health, they're checked, serviced, ready to go. Now the only issue with the alternator, now you will know that the original one is silver and this one came back black. Can't understand why, but you know, that's just my OCD. I would have preferred it silver, but there you go. So next job, in goes the starter motor. Now what I did before I actually bolted up the starter motor whilst it was loose is attach the electrical connections. I've just got this little one to bolt on. Like so, all those are in place now, ready to go. So now I bolt up the starter motor. Now you may have noticed here that I've made a bit of a mistake, I'll pick up on that later on. So that's the starter motor in. And the next thing I'm going to do is to fit the oil filter. I'm doing this now because it's a little bit easier, a little bit more room to work without the alternator on. So this is a genuine Alfa Romeo part. What I do is prime the oil filter. I suppose it isn't necessary, but it's just something that I've always done. And I put a little smear of oil around the seal. On she goes. Okay, so that's the oil filter on. Now a little tip when it comes to removal of your alternator. Now this lower bolt, this one just here, is nice and easy to remove, but the one further up above is a different story. The issue is that it fouls on the bodywork of the car when it comes to complete removal. And what a lot of people do is remove the engine mount, and the idea being is to raise the engine up. And the reason you want to do that is so that the bolt occupies this open space just above, which then in turn allows you to remove the bolt. This illustrates the problem a little bit more. Now bear in mind this engine is raised a little bit here, it should be a little bit lower, but you can see what you need to do. Now what I did is lightly support the diff underneath with a jack and a block of wood, undo the top dog mount engine mount, then raise the jack just to tilt the engine forward slightly, and that will give you enough room just to remove the bolt nice and easy. Okay, so in goes the reconditioned alternator. The bottom bolt and the easiest one in first, and I just wind that in, but I don't tighten it just in case I need to move the alternator a little bit more to get in the top bolt. Top bolt in nice and easy, no issues. And then I tighten those up a little bit later on. And then I simply lower the engine back down at the rear, reattach that engine mount. Okay, so the next thing to do is refit the auxiliary belt. I'm not replacing this because the previous owner of the car actually replaced it shortly before I bought it off him. It's still relatively new, in good order. With that, I'm actually fitting a new idler pulley because my old one was a little bit noisy, very warm, and spun a little bit too freely for my liking. So yeah, this is another genuine Alfa part. I got this on eBay for £20 delivered, which is the cheapest I could find it anywhere. On goes the idler. Nice and easy job. Now when it comes to refitting the auxiliary belt, you can find an illustration of the root of the belt online. As you can see, I put it over the alternator first, then around the top of the water pump, around the power steering, around the aircon, over the idler, around the crankshaft, and then finally on the tensioner. And this is exactly how the tensioner works, nice and easy, spring loaded. So that's the belt fitted, no problems. And then finally, just to finish off, I quickly put on those electrical connections to the alternator. Now the next thing, the exhaust manifolds, heat wrapped as you can see. The reason I heat wrapped these is because I didn't manage to get all of the heat shielding, but I did manage to get the most important ones. For the front bank, I managed to source the most important heat shield, which protects the fan shroud and all the electricals. I actually sourced this one from an Alfa Romeo 166 with the CF2 catless manifolds, and that fits perfectly. Now for the rear bank of manifolds, I've got the most important heat shield, which is the one that goes underneath. That protects the starter motor and all the wiring underneath there. And the reason I heat wrapped this again is because there's nothing stopping heat dissipation on the back. So that's going to go a long way helping that. Now I've got new gaskets going on. 6 cylinder, 6 branches, 6 gaskets. And to accompany those, I've also got some brand new copper nuts. and all of these I sourced again from Totally Alpha. So they're ready to go on the car now. Now the front bank I've actually already got on. Now for removal of the manifolds and refitting, the nut on the far right hand side was just basically inaccessible, so I had to actually unbolt my AC compressor, but we got there in the end, no problems. Now onto the rear bank. On go the new gaskets. And the catless manifold is much easier to get in and out compared to the big bulky CF3 ones. So that's in place now, and then I just go above on top and put all those nuts on, torque them down. So now, this is the problem, this is the thing I forgot to do. This bracket which holds all the cables is actually held on by the bolts to the starter motor. So I had to take those back out and bolt it back up. But wasn't too much of an issue, it has to be done properly. So next, refit the lambda sensor to the rear bank manifold. Then I go up top and plug that connection back in. So the next thing to do is the subframe. Now you may remember I had this nicely shot blasted and powder coated to a very high standard. I was chuffed to bits with that. I've also got all the hardware replated like new. Now the wishbones obviously are brand new, but unfortunately, as many people know, the paint that comes on them is absolutely rubbish and it doesn't last 2 minutes, so I actually rubbed mine down and repainted them with POR 15. And those anti-roll bar bushes are also polyurethane Powerflex bushes. So refitting the wishbones onto the subframe. Now you will have noticed that no, these are not Powerflex, these are just original bushes that came with the arms, but the rest of the car is Powerflexed. So that said, in the future I think I will be fitting Powerflex, but for now, for reassembly, I'm just sticking with the original bushes. They were a little bit fiddly to get on the nuts. They weren't perfectly aligned, sorry, the bolts rather. I'll cover that later on in the video. So that's all done now, ready to go. Now I could manhandle this into position, but what I chose to do instead is use my jack to take the weight. Once I got it relatively in place, the first thing I did was fitted the 2 longer outer bolts. I didn't tighten them all the way down, I just put them in halfway just to take the weight. Now with that done, I go around and fit all the smaller bolts. And then I just gun those down, not tight. And then what I did later on is go around with a torque wrench and torque all those down properly. So far so good. It's all looking fine and dandy under there. It's looking a lot better than it was before, that's for sure. Okay, so the last job to do is the rear lower engine mount. This I actually cleaned up and rubbed down, and I just painted it with some stone chip. On goes that little heat shield. And finally, the arm to the mount is put on last. Just lightly bolt that into place to begin with, and then tighten them down. And what I did is raised the back of the engine up to the subframe where it needs to be. Then I can get that bolt in and tighten that down. And there you go, job done. Pretty happy with that so far. Job's a good one. So there you go, we got everything done in this episode that I intended to do. Everything is on the car. The only issue I had today, believe it or not, was fitting the new wishbones to the subframe. Now, I believe this is a common issue with new wishbones, depending on what brand you buy. I bought TRW ones. The holes didn't quite line up with the holes on the subframe. There were just a couple of mil out, and I mean only just. Now, it doesn't sound like much, but it was an issue I had for about 10 minutes. What I did, instead of putting the wishbones straight up to the metal on the subframe and putting the bolt through, I actually stood off the wishbones away from the subframe so I could put the bolts straight through, line them up properly and tighten them down that way, and it worked absolutely perfectly. Again, doesn't sound like much, but you know, it's just something I was stumped on for a while. I didn't want to strip any threads, but we got there in the end. But yeah, other than that, everything today has been really straightforward. So yes, in the next episode, what you can look forward to is me refitting the drive shafts together with the hub carriers, and then leading us on to the best bit, which is refitting the Koni Sport adjustable suspension together with the iBack Pro springs. So yes, hopefully I'll see you next time. Please do like and subscribe. Thank you as always. See you in the next episode.